We're here discussing how COVID-19 has changed the world of learning. The education sector is going through a profound transformation as a result of the pandemic. Parents, teachers, and administrators are grappling with what to do to provide students with instructions and support. And today we will hear how EdTech is helping keep those students engaged in learning. We'll also learn about some techniques and tools and hear from the experts about emerging sense of best practices. I'll now invite our panelists to come up on the stage, the virtual stage, to introduce themselves and also answer the question, what has been the impact of COVID-19 on education from their perspective? I'll start with John Abbey, the Managing Director of Camden Learning.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for that warm welcome. I'm Managing Director of Camden Learning, which is a separate entity from Camden Council, although a joint venture owned by our schools, which is quite unique and novel. And we've been in being for about three years. The topic that we have chosen today, COVID-19 and how it's changed the world of learning, it's been reported nationally, locally, through media and through our politicians. So it is a live topic. I think for schools and young people in Camden, there are probably 6 emerging issues that I'll just quickly introduce before I hand back. Obviously, last week and this week, the returning to school and the fear of contacting COVID-19 for young people and their families, especially our BAME families. Attainment itself, the closing of the learning gap and biases in grading, and home education. It really has been, or who would have thought 3 months ago that home education, live learning from the lounge would be such an opportunity, but yet for many, such a challenge with overcrowding, language barriers, and that digital divide, the lack of access and equality and equity to Wi-Fi and devices themselves, which in some cases one could argue is widening that gap and making it now a chasm. Free school meals, poverty, disadvantage, the pupil premium, food poverty in particular, and the impact that has on families and for them themselves, just managing on a day-to-day, and where schools have played such a pivotal role in supporting families in those basic necessities. And the final point, that by way of introduction, is mental health in young people, where they're acutely aware of what's going on around them. They've felt that they've been socially distanced from their peers. That's impacted on them, as well as their anxiety about learning, especially those who are post 16 and awaiting A levels, and those with GCSEs pending as well, what the future might look for them. So I'll hand back to Lauren and hope that's okay as a quick introduction.
Thanks, John. Very interesting. I'm looking forward to digging into those 6 emerging issues as we go through the panel. I'd like to, for Joysy John, the Director of Education at Nesta, to further introduce herself and let us know from her perspective how education is being affected.
Thanks, Lauren. It's a great pleasure to be here this morning and share why I'm so passionate about education and why this is, during this crisis, it's a great opportunity to actually change and reimagine education. So being a computer engineer, I know how technology can transform lives, but I think education plays a huge role in helping everyone change their lives, but also lives of those around them. And we've seen this through this crisis, where teachers have come to the fore and have brought immense resilience and creativity in the way they are continuing with teaching despite school closures. We've seen edtech companies opening up their products for free and really helping those who are most disadvantaged during this crisis. Some of the tools that Nesta supports through our grant funding programs like Hegarty Maths, Seneca Learning, SumDog and others, who have seen immense increase in their usage during this time. So kids are learning at home, being supported by their parents. But on the other hand, we've also seen that the most disadvantaged are the ones who are losing out because they don't have devices or they don't have the right home environment to learn. And that's when we've seen government coming to the fore recently DFE announced 100 million to help the most disadvantaged kids, especially with devices and Wi-Fi connectivity. So during this crisis, we've seen immense adaptability, flexibility, and resilience from teachers, from parents, from students, and businesses and government. But we've also seen the fault lines that exist in society and the inequality that exists. So I'm really passionate about this topic because education changed my life, from starting in a remote part in India to having worked across 3 continents, all because of the education that I received. And I feel very strongly that collectively we can make a difference, and we can make sure that the education that we saw, that our parents saw, or our great grandparents saw, that has to change. The world that we live in today is very different than the world that we grew up in. So I'm really looking forward to the panel and the discussion.
Thanks, Joysy. It's great to hear sort of how the pandemic is shifting education, and also looking forward to hearing a little bit more about the pitfalls that we should be planning for, maybe a little bit later in the session. So with that, I'll turn over to our next panelist, Priya Lakhani, founder of Century Tech, to say a few more words about why she's passionate of this topic, as well as her thoughts on what's changing in the industry.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Well, I'm passionate about education. I mean, how can we all not be, right? It's one of the most important sectors in the world. It affects us, it affects our health, it affects absolutely everything. And so I'm a mother of 2 children who are downstairs. I'm sharing bandwidth with them right now, so do excuse me if mine is slightly flaky. But also I'm a social impact entrepreneur. I've been funding schools in parts of India and Africa for many years. And actually, when I was doing that, during our coalition government in the UK, that's where I learned that actually about 20% of our students in the UK, itself don't have the required levels of literacy and numeracy to get a really great job at the end of formula. I turned my efforts from running a food company, Masala, that was using all of its, a lot of its revenue, actually, not just profit, to fund schools. And I decided that actually I wanted to solve the problem. It's that old adage of rather than give a man a fish, you want to teach him how to fish. So, rather than, again, being sort of a not quite a sustainable charity funding schools through revenue, I thought, right, we need to actually get to the heart of the problem. And so I've now been involved in education, immersed in education in the technology field for 7 years. And COVID has obviously dramatically changed so many things. So building a technology company that truly personalizes education was key for me. It was about the fact that when my own children go to school, I don't want them to receive the one-size-fits-all education that I received, that the grandparents received, that we see in schools every single day. The delivery of education hasn't really changed in that one-size-fits-all way since the first university from the 16th century, or 10th century, I suppose. So I think all of that needs to change, and I was really passionate about having a huge impactful change. But at the same time, when I was going into school 7 years ago and researching the area, I met so many teachers, and I could see that the most important person in the classroom is definitely the child, but the most powerful person in the classroom is the teacher, and they're also equally actually as important. And I just can't believe we waste so much of their time. They spend 60% of their time marking and assessing. And so I thought, in order to empower these people, to ensure that they can make those interventions, they can differentiate for every child, they can do what they signed up to do. We know teachers don't come into teaching for the money, right? We all know that. So they come in for this rewarding, sort of passionate career to inspire children or impart knowledge of a subject they're really passionate about, but actually they spend a lot of their time doing admin. So we built a tool to be able to help them, to be able to help students. And COVID has dramatically changed things. The adoption curve of technology in education was pretty slow. Education is the least disrupted sector in the world. And therefore that presents, although that can seem really challenging and really daunting, it presents an enormous opportunity for us right now. And we had lots of innovators and pioneers using our AI technology. It's very data science, very AI, very neuroscience and sort of learning science based. It's very advanced. So those innovators and pioneers around the world had been embedding it in their classrooms for the last 5 years. But with COVID, what was really interesting to see was, because we were forced to go into online learning, we've seen a huge increase. Independent schools from across the globe, we've seen huge amounts of state-funded schools in the UK jumping onto Century, and that's actually because we provided it for free since January when we started seeing school closures in China. And what that's meant is that we've been forced to change our business model. So, you know, we were the most premium product out there, premium technology platform for schools, right? And it wasn't about being free. It was about building the best, something that, you know, a child in an elite school, for example, that child and that child's education, it should be the same at the same level, baseline education for every child, right? I don't believe in technology that is, well, if it's good for an academy school, it's fine. It's not good enough for a really big independent school. It's got to be good enough for every single child. COVID forced us to change our model. We opened it out to everyone. And now what we're seeing is that schools, teachers, students from all over the place, no matter what background, are able to access it, although we have infrastructure problems, we have device problems, we have connectivity problems. And so we need to look at those and fix those. And obviously very happy to discuss the challenges that we also see on the panel.
Yeah, I think that will be technology to not only scale, but to deliver tailored education to learners. Thanks for that. And our last panelist is Rose Luckin, a professor of learner-centered design at UCL Knowledge Lab in London. Rose, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your area?
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. Great introductions by everybody else. That was really interesting. I'm really looking forward to having a discussion. So yeah, I'm a professor at University College London, and like Joysy, education changed my life from a truanting teenager who loved running, generally running as far away from school as was possible, to an academic professor at UCL, a job I didn't even know existed when I was that teenager running away from school. So absolutely, education changes lives. And I've been saying for the last few years that the combination of artificial intelligence, which is my background, and digital technologies in generally, the infrastructure that we've built could mean that we could provide a high quality education to every child, wherever they are. And we really need to do this. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning. And yet here we are now in a situation where a tiny little virus has brought about a situation where we're now in a giant experiment. An experiment we weren't prepared for, and an experiment that we're not actually tracking, and we're not really collecting the data we need to know whether it's working or not. We're flying by the seat of our pants. And that's just how it is. You wouldn't choose to start from here if you wanted to have a mass experiment. You've done lots of preparation and made sure everything was in order and everything was working. Teachers were prepared, you know, learners had the devices and all the resources they needed, but we didn't have that opportunity. And I feel really concerned as an educator and as an academic about the huge strain that this is putting on society, the enormous cracks that, you know, there were fissures there already and now they're pushing widely open, the enormous problems of disadvantaged learners, which goes beyond access to technology, access to a quiet place to learn, access to an environment where people support the fact that you want to learn. You know, we really have got ourselves into a very difficult position. And yet, as Joysy said, you know, teachers have really risen to the game. Everybody's trying really hard. It's not that people aren't trying really hard, but, you know, we wouldn't have chosen to start from here if we really wanted to have a giant experiment. And so I think we owe it to all of those teachers, the parents, the learners, the edtech companies like Priya's who've given away their technology for free. You know, lots of people have put a lot of effort in. We really owe it to them to ensure that what we take out of this benefits everybody, and that we really do push forward on that dream of being able to combine our AI technologies of the sort that Priya's company works on with educational sound learning science, and use the infrastructure we've built to make sure that everybody gets a decent stab at the education. I want everybody to be able to, you know, have the transformation that I experienced. It changed my life for the better to such a huge extent. We need to make sure everybody has that opportunity.
Thanks for that, Rose. You know, I agree that despite the devastation that COVID-19 has caused, it really is an opportunity for change.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and it's going to cause a durable shift in education because of these unanticipated experiments we're running now. and really will maybe revamp the model for instruction. And we're all here because technology is at the epicenter of that post-pandemic shift. So with that, let's dig in a little bit more. 3 years from now, 5-10 years from now, when hopefully the pain of mandatory social distancing is long forgotten, what would be different, from now than before? John, you want to share something on that?
Happy to come in on that, Lauren. Yeah, thank you. It's fascinating hearing from everyone's perspective and the passion it just oozes. And so it should. What I heard from head teachers last week was, as schools began to re-emerge, and they've always been open, but open wider, actually young people came into school with joy and smiles. They wanted to come back to school. They wanted to come back to learn. But one can't help but feel that things will never be the same. And you've heard that concept of the new norm just keep being rephrased. And schools are resilient, they're robust, they're adaptable, they change, they learn, they review, they re-implement, and they're very resilient places. But you're right, Lauren. In three years' time, what will it look like? I think what a STEAM team in Camden have done, and they're a fabulous entrepreneurial group. This phase, they've gone on to online virtual work experience. So there are places for 500 young people this summer to be working with the likes of Google, Amazon, Facebook, etc., who are going to be working. So they've adapted really quite quickly. So what work experience might look like. So I think that our learning and our continued professional development won't necessarily be quite so face-to-face. We've adapted. You can't just ignore face-to-face. They're hugely valuable. But in terms of time, space, and saving, just moving things online as we are now means that actually that CPD can, from teachers' perspective, young people's perspective, can continue to just thrive. Learning platforms, so the likes of Google Classrooms, Show My Homework, Teams, have actually transformed schools where they've, in some cases, I know where one secondary school implemented the whole infrastructure in 2 weeks. That won't be lost. That really won't be lost. But they hopefully will capitalise on those learning platforms and develop the aspects that are somewhat undeveloped, are things like feedback. I do believe that, and a lot has been said around devices, and Priya, it's great to hear about Priya and so many other organisations where they've rolled out their own devices, made sure that families with lots of young people in them can share more than one device or have a device. But I think it goes wider to that around community Wi-Fi. So in 3 years' time, will we have community Wi-Fi? So when you go to somewhere like Disney, you can all get online, can't you? And it's huge. But why can't we do that more locally so that there is that freer access for young people and families to get onto Wi-Fi, so they, even with a phone, not even necessarily with a device, they can get on there and do the work that they need to do and to keep up. That's notwithstanding the fact that you've got to think about motivation and sustaining that motivation for young people and families, which I think is really difficult online. But yeah, I could go on, but those are the three main things, Lauren.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. You talked a lot about maybe infrastructure improvements that we're making now and using technology to help scale. What should we be building now? You mentioned the community Wi-Fi, but what else should we be building now to be prepared for the future? And Priya, could you maybe weigh in on that?
Yeah, sure. I just want to say one thing with the previous question, then I'll definitely answer that. But I'm actually really worried. I think, look, while we've seen an unprecedented increase in the number of schools using Century, right? We've seen, thousands, tens of thousands more schools. So including the individuals in those schools, that's hundreds of thousands of individuals, millions abroad. What I'm concerned about is that I think there will be a new normal for those schools. So if we take, let's say, the 30,000 schools, in the UK, let's say, about a third of those will change when they eventually go back. And the new normal in three years, when social distancing hopefully is long forgotten, as you said, they will be different. They're going to be accessing and using this technology from now. They might be using it over the summer holidays, even though everyone wants a holiday. They might be thinking that the attainment gap is now so it's increased so much, they might want to set more work using online. So you're leveraging it for positive purposes. You might be using it a lot more in September, and that's fantastic. And we're seeing that we're prepared for that. We've scaled our back end systems to allow for that. And that's great. But the big problem is that about 2/3 of schools, I think, will go back to doing old school, right? So mind the pun, but that's what they're going to be doing. They're going to be old school. They're going to go back to teaching face-to-face, one size fits all. And those teachers will actually feel relieved because that's going to be easier than the technology they've been using during COVID and during lockdown. During lockdown, they've been using systems like Teams and Zoom, which of course are really helpful. They've transformed all of our lives. We wouldn't be doing this without them. The problem though is that they're using those technologies to deliver a one-size-fits-all to a class of 30 kids. That's really difficult. All teachers are finding this difficult. I mean, you know, they should be clapped for every week or at least once a year. If we're going to be doing it once a year, let's clap for teachers, right? They're going and making that extra effort and going this, but they're finding it really difficult because those teachers haven't experienced using new advanced technologies. They just haven't adopted them for whatever reason. There are several reasons. They're overwhelmed with the amount of resources and information out there. They're not sure what to use. They're skeptical about technology and always have been and don't particularly want to give it a go. They don't have enough infrastructure in the school. The kids don't have the devices. So the problem that we're now going to see is that when we do move forwards as a world post-COVID, while 1/3 of schools, let's say in the UK, will move forward with that, I think there'll be about 2/3 maybe who are left behind who are going to go back to the old school. That can create a bigger digital divide. So that can increase social mobility even more. We know through impact studies, and Luckin, Professor Luckin here is, you know, the master of this in terms of impact studies. Nesta also conduct lots of impact studies. We now know that this new type of complex advanced technology does improve outcomes. I've got the data on my desk. It can improve outcomes by about 30% across the board. So if you now imagine the new normal, a portion of schools are going to now leverage that technology. They're going to get better. And then a larger portion of schools are going to stay the same. You can see that divide. And nobody wants children to have different access. We want to level the playing field. But that doesn't mean that you then hamper the other guys. You know, you don't give them the technology. So this is actually a huge issue that needs to be resolved. So to John's point, it's because you need that special triangle, right? In the triangle, you need your hardware. So you need your devices, whether it's mobile phones I have a slight issue with. There are lots of apps that do quite well on mobile, but mobile has been, we haven't got hard evidence at the moment, but what we're seeing is that mobile can actually increase instant gratification with children rather than delayed, and increase, you know, there's a lot of gaming and points type apps where you don't learn the intrinsic value of learning, you learn extrinsic value, and that can have a really detrimental impact on the long-term plans, you know, in the long-term sort of education for a child. But you need the hardware, so you need the devices, and I think DFE have had a plan obviously to push out more devices, and that's fantastic. They need a long-term plan. You need to renew those devices every 2 to 3 years, right? Because they get old and they need upgrading. Then you need the software, obviously platforms and software that uses web-based technology or app-based technology, and obviously that's my part of the sector there. And then you need the infrastructure, and like John said, you know the community Wi-Fi, what's going to be available. But unless you get the three, you won't have a very smooth rolling out of new technology that can actually personalize, that can save teacher time, that helps teachers work smarter rather than harder. So all three need to be thought of in tandem as an ecosystem rather than focusing on one. And the big problem that we generally have, it's not something that's insurmountable, because I think actually in government people do work very well together in different countries, and in the UK they do. But you find that infrastructure might be that might be in the remit of DCMS, Department of Culture, Media and Sport, right? And they might be looking at digital and telcos, right, for example. Then, for example, you might have DFEs looking at education, but you can start to see how the ministries, the different departments in government need to work together, because if you're going to get these things right, they all need to think, right, what's the long-term strategy for education? There's a fantastic organisation called the FED, the Foundation for Educational Development, and it's been founded by Carl Ward. He's actually the CEO of a multi-academy trust up north in Stoke, and he's been talking about a long-term plan, and I think that's what's essential. We need a long-term plan. We need some immediate band-aid type cures, which is obviously what we're coming up with COVID, and then we need to think long-term about what's everything that we need in this ecosystem to ensure that we can future-proof education, but for all children, so that we don't disrupt and create a larger attainment gap between children, and we can somehow level the playing field.
So we need to be thinking about building the ecosystem that encompasses hardware, software, as well as infrastructure. And I think to some previous comments, also, I think providing students with the right learning environment and sort of providing them the tools to leverage the technology to get the most out of education. Thanks for that, Priya. So we've talked a lot about primary schools and earlier education. What will be different in higher education? And I was hoping, Rose, you could weigh in a little bit, given your background.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as there's a difference, isn't there? What will be different and what would we like to be different? So I'm going to be optimistic. Now, I can't wait to see happy, smiling faces come back to university, because that's not happening at the moment, and not for rather a long time, unfortunately. And I think higher education has had more investment in technology and infrastructure than the school sector. So in a way, we ought to be in a better position to deal with this particular crisis. And I think we have done well. We have, you know, at my own university, UCL, we have managed to get remote learning working to an extent for everyone. It's been a huge amount of effort for staff and for the students themselves. But we're not going to be seeing those students for probably until next January, which is an incredibly long time. And I think universities have got to be bold about how they rethink the way that they have engaged with technology and the way that it could support the way that they're going to have to transform their business models. Because the harsh reality for research universities is that they've had huge numbers of international students subsidizing the research that they do. And for non-research intensive universities, there's vulnerability because less students may be able to afford to come to university, given that the fact that it's £9,000 a year. And some students may want to defer to see how the employment situation pans out. Other students may feel more enthusiastic, and national students may feel more enthusiastic about going to university, because if there's high unemployment, then going to university might be a good thing to do. But then you immediately get a huge gap again, don't you? Because who's going to be able to afford to go to university from the national student pool? So universities have to rethink their business models. It's a really difficult situation for universities. And I think it is a bit different to other areas of the education sector. And so I think really what will be durable will be the way that they will have to change their business models. And I think for many that will mean hybrid ways of working. So you have students coming on campus for shorter periods, you have quite a lot of online learning for everyone, and you have a mixture. So you have a blended approach, and that's actually, maybe we see the end of semesters, the end of terms in the way that we've had them in the past. And I think the really brave universities will go for, you know, a hybrid model for global education. They'll get their act together and they'll rethink exactly how they've structured what they're offering. But it's hard, because the most usual product for a university is a 3-year degree. And a 3-year degree takes at least a year to develop and then a year to evaluate. So that is 5 years for that basic product. Now, of course, you have shorter courses, master's degrees. So I think you'll also see a change in the types of courses and the types of qualifications that are available. So yeah, I think this will precipitate quite a big change in the HE sector. I hope it will, because I think there's a huge amount to be gained from doing that. But it's got to be done thoughtfully. And my last point is, and this is true across the education sectors, it's got to be done with a mindset that is not one that thinks that online is cheaper. Because it isn't. Doing it really well, doing really good blended learning is not a cheap option. It's an option that requires a lot of attention and planning and careful execution to make sure that you keep everybody motivated and everybody on board. So yes, I think I would say I think there will be some really durable fundamental changes to the way that higher education operates, not just in the UK, I think in other parts of the world as well.
Yeah, and it sounds like for universities in the UK, it's thinking more globally and really designing those programs to reach a global audience that maybe encompass a little bit of in-person as well as the online.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the way that the Open University has operated, it's something we should learn from. They realized that you couldn't do everything remotely, which is why they had local study centers. They have summer schools. And I think that's a really useful way of thinking about this, and thinking about offering courses to international students doesn't mean they've got to come here for all of the time. And it doesn't mean that you have to have a campus of your UK university in their country. There are other ways of doing this. We really need to rethink that whole piece. And I think there will be a lot of attention to that.
Thanks for that perspective. It's very thought-provoking to sort of imagine the future of higher education. Joysy, we've talked a little bit about the pitfalls of the digital divide and some of the social inequality of this, of possibilities as we're changing. What are some other, or even digging a little bit deeper into the social divide, what are some of the pitfalls that we should be planning for, or helping future-proof these plans that we're developing?
Sure. I think there's a lot of innovative approaches going on within the schools, colleges, and the university sector, but it feels like we haven't yet managed to establish a way of organizing and sharing this information around what works and why, and when it doesn't, under what context does it work. So the key thing that I want to emphasize is the need for evidence, and the fact that there might be hundreds or thousands of tools out there that claim that they solve a problem that a teacher or a learner or a school has, but who has verified it and what is the standard of evidence? And that's why Nesta is working with the Department for Education on the EdTech Innovation Testbed, where we are actively looking to test some of these tools that are being used in schools and colleges. But due to the school closures, we've had to pause some of these pilot trials that we had planned. But we are working with the Behavioral Insights team and Hegarty Maths, who's also one of our EdTech Innovation grantees. And Hegarty is run by Colin Hegarty, one of the inspirational teachers who's used his understanding of what is working within the classroom and what's not working, and how to help kids learn using his tool for learning maths. And we're working with Hegarty Maths to try and understand what motivates students to continue to persist online when they are solving problems on their own. So understanding what works, what doesn't. Can we do more agile A/B testing? Can the messages be customized? Can the feedback be customized? What can we do to engage parents? What can we do to help teachers give better feedback? So it's not purely driven by an AI making all the decisions around, what's the most personalized route, but it's engaging parents and teachers. So that's one thing around the evidence piece. I think the second thing is about innovation. As I said, there's a lot of innovation happening, but it's mainly happening in maths and science, where it's a quiz or a multiple choice question, because there is a right answer. So you can measure it, you can improve it. But what about the key skills that we all know is going to be crucially important? Social and emotional skills, well-being, mental health. Self-reliance, agency, self-awareness, metacognition, all these skills, from creativity to collaboration to problem solving, these don't have a yes/no answer, or you need. It's more difficult to assess some of these things, and hence Nesta has been working on the Future Ready Fund to really understand how do you build these social and emotional skills in young people, and how do you assess it. So we've been working with the University of Sussex to build the evidence base around social and emotional skills. And what we're also doing is we're funding Impact Ed to collect data on social and emotional learning for kids who are going through some challenges during COVID-19, especially when it comes to disadvantaged kids or those on free school meals. So it's not enough to say, yes, we all know that the achievement gap is going to worsen. The progress that we've made in years is going to be set back. But then what can we actually do? It's not just about getting more tutors or training more kids to use technology. It's also about understanding these social and emotional skills. So I think it's crucial that we innovate and experiment in the area of building holistic skills, capabilities, knowledge, and values for everyone, and not just the elite students. And my final point is around equality. So as we're looking to the future, as we're looking to redesign an education system that works for all, I think we need to keep equality and fairness at the heart of it, because as we all know, racism and equality is designed, or it's basically been there for years, and until and unless we change it by taking action and being aware of these things that seep into our algorithms, we won't be able to change it. So I think it links back to the point I was making earlier around evidence. Until and unless you know what's not working, you can't change it. And the more we can think about evidence, innovation, and equality as the three pillars of the future that we want to build, the more we'll be aware of building a better future.
And it sounds a little bit of also experimenting and doing iteration as we learn new things on these. Yeah. I think there were some final points, maybe Priya or John, did you have anything?
I'd love to come in on that actually, because it is CogX, and obviously CogX, has this unique ability to bring experts of data science and AI to these forums. And so I just want to pick up on a point, because AI doesn't just you don't just get an AI to do something. There was the point about we're going to look at teachers and parents. You have to train an AI, and you use teachers and parents and schools and interactions to do that. It takes years to train an AI. That work's been done. So I mean, and I'm saying this just as the founder and CEO of an AI company in EdTech. It's for 3 years and ongoing every single day, every second. What you're doing is you're taking teacher, parent and student interactions, and you're also taking their feedback. You're A/B testing, you're physically in classrooms, you're watching, you're working with sets amount, schools. You're making sure that you don't have a sort of bias base. So you've got to make sure that you have diversity. That's why, for example, when Century started, we had free schools, academies, independent schools. We had schools from all over the country. We had schools from different parts of the world. You had different demographics, disadvantaged. You made sure you had special needs of all different types. You've got to do all of that work. And so you're then taking all the feedback. You're taking the qualitative feedback from all the stakeholders. You're then taking the quantitative analysis, which only really a machine can do accurately very quickly, right? Because otherwise you're waiting for a human to do and analyze that data, and it could take, you can miss something. Right. And then you train the AI, right? And then once you've trained the AI is trained, and you're constantly refining that. And also so actually, I just want to kind of come back on that, because you don't just get an AI to do something. People have done that work, right? And that work takes years, and it takes years of expertise. And so it's a bit challenging, obviously, to hear doing something one way and then getting an AI to do another. It's just like, no, that doesn't work, because AI just doesn't, it doesn't think, it doesn't have a brain, right? You have to train it in exactly that type of way. So, and that takes a lot of data points. And the last thing I just want to say was on how these sorts of machines are obviously then put into the wild, if you like, with bias, as an issue. It's the infrastructure that you build, right? So you've got to make sure that your AI the AI itself then doesn't learn by itself data points on ethnicity or on advantaged backgrounds, because then you can ensure that it just takes experts to build these sorts of things, and you can't get everything right. And that's why Luckin and I have co-founded the Institute for Ethical AI that we're talking about tomorrow at CogX. But I just want to make the point clear, because I know there's a lot of experts listening to this. So
yeah, and I think there was maybe one other point that wanted to come forward.
Yeah, can I very, very quickly, I know time's running through, is just to say that, as much as you've got digital, you've got online and platforms, what we are seeing is the engagement from young people has drifted. There's something liberating around getting young people back in schools, and schools remain the pillars of communities because they serve the communities. And if you spoke to a number of those teachers, although the learning platforms and devices have occupied a lot of our discussions, with 25% in community schools uptaking that offer, motivation, sustainability, and getting that engagement has been truly difficult. And therefore, you do need that blended approach. But young people need that socialization. They need to learn from one another. Peer learning is huge. Right. Isolationist is not helpful. And I think by getting young people back to school enables that liberation and relieves that anxiety too.
Right. Rose, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, just really to back up what other people have said, one of the beauties of AI is that in the background, not with children plugged into computers all of the time, in the background, we can be helping to evaluate and assess these really important learning skills, as Joysy has identified, as well as, are you improving at math, but also, are you more resilient? Are you understanding yourself more? Are you more self-effective? It doesn't have to, you can be doing it in a blended way. Because
so combining some of those hard topics with
and we know how to do this, and that's the real power, and it's incredibly exciting, but we have to get it right, and we have to do it in a responsible way, and in a way that's informed by what we understand about human learning.
Thanks for that.
We made huge strides in that, as well as huge strides in AI technology.
I think there's some great closing points here as well, right? It's an exciting time. We need to do it right. And we need to put the foundations in place to get it right, but it's going to take some time. I'd like to really thank our panelists for sharing your views on how education will change post-pandemic, and really how we can be better prepared for the future with some of those techniques and tools. And I think it would be a good time maybe to wrap it up and just say thank you. Thanks for joining us here today. There's also a Q&A session available after this. So with that, I think I'll hand it over to Georgia, our MC.
Thanks so much, guys. That was so insightful, and I think we're all just trying to make sense of what's going on at the moment, and there's no one better place to do it than you. I learned loads, so I hope everyone at home enjoyed that. Building on the last session, we are delighted that Derek Lee from Squirrel AI has sent us a video account of how his online learning business pivoted to cope with COVID-19. With video restrictions making it impossible for him to join us live, we invited him to share his experience of life in China under lockdown in this video.
Hi, I'm Derek Haoyang Lee from Squirrel AI Learning. This COVID crisis actually is really a disaster to our company because we have more than 2,000 offline learning centers all over China. And when this crisis started, we have to shut down all the centers. So we have more than 10,000 employees in these centers, and all our students are learning from offline. So we have a rapid move strategy to face this situation. At the first week, we organized more than 20 trainings for the employees to train all the teachers how to teach online. And fortunately, our product, Squirrel AI Learning, is a virtual tutor. So all our students, when they study at the offline center, actually they are studying on the computer. So when they change the situation at home, it is very easy for the students and the parents to switch. But for the teachers, they do not know how to teach online. So we have to train them very quickly. And at that time, it was Chinese New Year holiday. And most of the teachers, they do not realize how severe this disease is. And for most of the provinces, there were not even one confirmed patient there. So most of our teachers, they feel very relaxed, and they just went back home to stay with their parents, or they go to abroad and for the sightseeing. But we ask them to, immediately get into the situation like wartime. So they have to watch the training videos all day long, and they have to adapt to the online learning style, and they have to call their students and persuade them to learning online. And for this holiday, usually no Chinese student are studying at this period of time. So we take a lot of effort to persuade all these students and the parents to try to learning on this holiday, to get used to this online learning form. So after 1 week holiday, it was time. It should be the time that the offline centers reopened, but nobody could open. In China, there are 1 million offline centers shut down. So, but for our students and our teachers, they are ready to continue their learning online. So in the next month, that was February, our learning student number have 400% growth than the year before. And all these students learned 800 times more hours on our system. And we also helped more than 200 cities, their public schools and their education department to have the students, their routine, learning to change into online style. So by all this method, actually our learning centers not only survived, but they got more students and they recruit more students. Compared to other 1 million offline learning centers, only there's a investigation shows that only 20% of the learning centers switched to online learning. And in this 20%, they changed only half of their students online. So for the 80% of the offline centers, they have to remain shut down until now. That was more than 4 months. And another investigation by the CEIBS, which is the top 10 business school, they showed that 80% of this 80% offline learning center, their cash could not survive for more than 3 months. So actually, from this month, China was reopened and the offline center was allowed to reopen again. But actually, we found a lot of offline learning centers already bankrupt. And when our new franchisees, they are funding the new location for their learning centers, they found out that usually 1 year before, when we see 20 locations, there are only 1 locations are looking for renting. But now, every 20 locations, there are around 7 locations are looking for renting. So that means a lot of the small business went bankrupt at this crisis. In the past 4 months, we faced a lot of other difficult situations. For example, we could not recruit students from the street because before this pandemic, most of our students are recruiting offline. So we have all kinds of offline marketing methods. But in this period, we could not go to offline because no student went to school and no student were on the street. So we have to find other method. One is we give 1 million free accounts that worth $200 free for the student. So after 3 months free learning, 10% of this million student, they buy our real price, which is $1,000 course. So, and also I have another method. I give out a lot of small videos talking about education, adaptive learning, and also family relationship between parents and kids. And I got 100 million viewers and 3 million likes. So all this method give us more brand spreading and let more students understand us and more parents notice us, and they paid our course. Another good news for me is recently we did an investigation. We asked a lot of parents. Some of them are our students, and some they study in other brand, and or they do their online course in their public school. Another reason that why our students' number grows so fast is when they compared adaptive learning, Squirrel AI, and other online learning form. A lot of students, they think we are more attractive because first, by other online learning, some of them may not follow the teachers because it was lasting too much time. But in Squirrel AI, we have 3 minutes video, and we interact with the student, and we could get the question very challenging for very good student, and we could get easy questions for the very poor student, so that they feel it was customized for them, and they feel very good, and they feel they could interact with Squirrel AI teachers, and by the learning more and more time, they think Squirrel AI understands them very much in the deep. So for a lot of students, they got frustrated in the class because some of the time they could not understand what the teacher saying, but it just passed. But in Squirrel AI learning, we could give them different videos and teach them in different aspects, and we could give them some concepts that for very easy for them to digest, and then give them higher level or another angle. So in this very flexible method, the student could feel very comfortable in this learning journey. So our story became selected by the UNESCO in their white paper to be a model for online learning in this pandemic. And also our company became one of the role model that the mayor of Shanghai and the vice mayor praised us for booming the economy, for helping. And recently, as more and more our learning centers reopened, actually Squirrel AI evolved into another creature, because before we could only do the offline learning, but now all the students, they could choose to study online, or they could choose to study offline. And some of the class, there are half of the students learning online and half offline. So we could deal with all this situation, and we could provide all kinds of service for the students and the parents. And more students and parents, they understand deeper and deeper about AI education and adaptive learning.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.